Part of what you're watching with the Trump administration ought to be understood as a war on the working class, at home, but also abroad. What is being done in Europe is remarkable. A deal that came out of World War II, in which the United States would defeat the Soviet Union barely a few months after being the great ally. It became overnight the great enemy, showing a kind of flexibility which is at once astonishing, but also impressive in terms of meeting your own needs and rearranging the pieces on the board that you're playing with. The deal that was made was the following. We, the United States, we have two big worries right now. Number one, an awful lot of money was taxed or borrowed from rich corporations and the wealthy people to provide a remarkable array of mass services. Unemployment insurance, a minimum wage, the Social Security system, government employment. This had to be rolled back. And as you know very well, our last 50 years are the story of the rollback of that New Deal. But it also required smashing the socialists and communists who had created that New Deal with their alliance for a while with the Democratic Party. All of that had to be undone and was undone. The second great anxiety at the end of the war was that we would fall back into a depression. Let's remember, it was only the war that finally got us out of the horrible collapse of capitalism from 1929 to 1940-41. And only by taking the remaining many, many millions of people, putting half of them in uniform and the other half making the uniforms, we were able, and then the great worry, and it was very serious, at the end of the war, 45, what would now happen? We would demobilize all these people. What would prevent us from slipping back? And you can see the government did extraordinary things. The GI Bill, to take all those soldiers and instead of having them go into the unemployment, stick them in the university where the government would pay for it. The housing program, the highway program, all of them. But what people don't recognize was that there was another part of this, and that was the international part with Europe. The problem was Europe had the same depression history as this country did. And during that time, as in the United States, socialist and communist parties became much stronger than they had ever been. Plus, the socialists and communists provided the militants who were the anti-fascist resistance. So they were popular. De Gaulle's first government after 45 had to have Communist Party people in the cabinet. For Italy, the second biggest party in the 20 years after the war was the Italian Communist Party, and I could go on. And they all had the Soviet Union literally a few hours by train from them. So their capitalist classes were even more freaked out about what was going on. And then the alliance with the Soviet Union, it was all too much. So what the United States did is cut a deal. We will solve our economic problem by putting Keynesianism on steroids. The government is going to come in and do what? Save us from the Soviet menace. Build up the military industrial and say to the Europeans, we'll take care of it. We'll provide you with the defense umbrella. All you have to do is make sure you crush the socialists and communists at home, and you are a good bulwark against the Soviet Union. And you're going to take the money you would have had to spend to provide the social services that will allow you to compete with what the Russians are offering their people at that time. And then we're going to take our National Endowment for Democracy, our CIA, and all the rest, and make sure the right politicians sit at the top of the government in France, in Germany, in Britain, and we all know the story of all of the money and the sloshing that was done. That was it. But the problem is, all of that was paid for by debt. The United States does not like to fight wars with taxes. It likes to fight wars with money borrowed, because if you tax the people, the opposition to the war would be much bigger and arise much sooner. Here's the irony. The Europeans were major lenders for a while to the United States to fund the Keynesianism that protected them from having to use their money for their own defense. The ironies of how this all fit together are a charming story that's never quite been put down on paper. What we have now is the collapse of that deal. The problem is so much of it was done without understanding of the special moment. The United States had no competitor coming out of World War II. Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia, they were all destroyed. We came out king of the hill. Our economy was in better shape coming out of the war than it was going in, and no one else could say that. And the result was a very bizarre special moment that could not possibly last. I think historians will look back, be rather impressed it lasted as long as it did. But in any case, it is now over. You can't do it. The United States lost the war in Vietnam. It lost in Iraq. It's losing it in Ukraine. And these are among the poorest countries on earth to which the U.S. is losing. And the Europeans are left in a way one almost has to sympathize. They've become the literal opposite of what they were 3 or 4 centuries ago. The center of the universe, the apogee of culture, the colonial master, it's all gone. Europe is living in a world of fantasy where, being unable to stop the Russians with the United States, they actually think that they're going to do it without the United States. These are levels of craziness that are part of the decline, I suspect, of all empires when they consume themselves. I am particularly struck with this crazy business of attacking federal employees in the name of efficiency. 2.5 million civilian employees of the federal government versus 5 million working for state government and 15 million working for the local government. If you cared a damn about efficiency, your obvious targets would be local and state, but they can't get at those, so they go after the federal. That's a decision of where can we make a public performance. It ruins the lives of those people. It destroys whatever function these agencies often had. It drives people entering the labor force, which is a larger number than those leaving the federal. They're all going to go into the private sector where they're going to bid down wages. At the same time that they can't control the inflation, you're ripping up your working class more and more, as if there were no end to this process. These are the desperate behaviors of a dying empire. They had that ideology, the private sector is the efficient, they've been believing that for 200 years, if not longer. You know, it has many names: liberalism, neoliberalism, laissez-faire, lots of language for the same basic idea. But they were always counteracted to some extent by sort of practical men and women who said to them, wait a minute, yeah, maybe, but if we don't solve this problem real quick, and the only agency that's going to do that is the government, we are going to be in deep trouble. You know, we turn to the government to run the military when we're attacked because the private isn't quite, and then they will make a break. They will do what Roosevelt ended up doing in the 1930s. They'll intervene in the labor market. There's a minimum wage. We don't care what market forces are, you don't go below that. And I want to remind people, even the conservatives had those. When the inflation was unmanageable in 1971, Nixon goes on the radio and television and says, I am freezing all wages and prices in the United States. As of tomorrow morning, if you raise your price, Mr. Businessman, we're going to arrest you and you're going to jail. Whoa. This is a kind of recognition if you have the space. What we have now is a population increasingly persuaded, right up to the top, that there is no space. You can't afford a parent solution of the government. You've got to do something. And the only thing they can think of, given the narrowness of our education, is that fantasy. They're going to save America by going backwards. What in the world is that? Go back to what? Whatever it is that got you here. I mean, it's nuts. I would guess in other empires, as they declined, they began to appeal to their gods, to their fetishes, to their fantasies, because they had nothing practically workable left. We are borrowed up to here with our $35 trillion of national debt. It's way above our national GDP, which is not supposed to be. That used to be considered a no-no line. Our European allies don't do it as badly as we do it, although they're about to. Look at the Germans. There's a losing of your mind. Mr. Merz ran a campaign on preserving the German commitment to no government borrowing. within days of the election, he completely reverses himself and now champions the biggest debt expansion in German history to build a military. Who's he going to fight? The Russians? That's a joke. The Chinese? That's a bigger joke. The United States? Perhaps the biggest joke of all. What? The only people he could use that for are the other Europeans. I think somewhere we've seen that picture before. These are behaviors that people like you and me and others in the media are going to have a harder and harder time nailing down because they are the desperate acts of a declining empire that doesn't know where to turn. There's something that's important about the tariffs that doesn't get the attention it ought to. If I read American politics correctly, then for at least the last 100 years, the Republican Party's major mantra has been, we are the anti-tax party. And they go to every part of the population they can to sell that story. A tariff is a tax on imported objects that are produced elsewhere and sold here. In the early days of American history, these were called import duties. There's more evidence that something is really breaking down because they have to become advocates of the very thing they were against. And the same people out of whose mouth on the 4th of July comes anti-tax BS are now telling you about what a wonderful weapon the tariff is. The reason Mr. Trump uses it, by the way, is that Congress gave the president a lot of leeway about doing that, and he couldn't do that with many other weapons because they have to go through the Congress or through various procedures other than him just spouting off on Truth Social how he's going to do this or that, do it today, cancel it tomorrow, all this bizarre theatric. There is no principle behind it. Number one. Number two, there's nothing new. Countries have been throwing tariffs against each other for centuries. Why do I tell you this? Because there's an immense literature. You cannot tell people what a tariff will do. The reason is a tariff sets off a whole series of reactions. They will all respond, but how they do it, it's like knowing in advance the chess move. You have some probabilities maybe, but you never know. And the genius is the one who adjusts. So when Mr. Trump tells you the Chinese will pay the tariff, he had to have his advisors, some of whom I know, had to explain to him, and he couldn't get it. No, the tariff is paid by Americans to the American government. The Chinese don't pay any of it. You can imagine a reaction in China that might, yes, you can. But there's no reason to assume it. For example, one response to a tariff is a retaliatory tariff. Okay, you can't know in advance whether they will do that, and you can't know in advance what products of yours they will impose a tariff again. They don't have to do it across everything. Europe is busy taxing bourbon whiskey, and so are the Chinese for obvious political reasons because it impacts Mr. Trump's economic base. But we don't know. If Canada cannot sell its electricity into the United States, well, then they're going to sell it to China. Is that really an advantage? The answer is no. Is that a possibility? Yes. In other words, the minute you understand what's going on, all you have from Mr. Trump and his associates is blather. What looks good on the evening news, we're going to do this, and it's going to have that result. That's exactly what he can't do. Nobody can do that. And even a passing awareness, if you're not a paid huckster, is you would say, well, this is going to hurt the relationship. It's going to lead to a lot of rethinking and choices among optional, and how they all add up and impact on us. I mean, the only honest answer is I don't know.